My son said, "She's my real mother now." The words didn't come to me in private. They came through the laughter of strangers. While I was standing behind the glass counter of the bakery I had run for 52 years, the bell above the door was still swinging from where Ethan had pushed it open, bringing Camille in on his arm, as though she were the guest of honor. I was wiping powdered sugar from my palms when I heard him say it to Mrs. Larkin from the post office, his voice proud, almost defiant, like a man showing off a prize he'd won. "I am Margaret Doyle, 76 years old, owner of Doyle's Bakery in Port Claremont, Maine. For half a century I have baked the cinnamon twists that sold out every Saturday before noon, the blueberry scones that tourists mailed home in tins, the pies locals ordered for every Thanksgiving. My husband, Frank, fished the waters here long before the arthritis took his hands. My son Ethan grew up dusted in flour, playing under these counters while I rolled dough for the morning crowd. We were a family you'd imagine could never unravel, but that morning, the bakery was full, and the smell of fresh apple pies had barely settled in the air when Ethan decided to redraw the lines of who belonged to me, and who I belonged to. Mrs. Larkin looked at me over the edge of her bifocals, her mouth tight, as if I'd done something shameful to deserve those words. Camille leaned into Ethan's shoulder, her eyes scanning the display case with a kind of ownership that made my stomach knot. She didn't ask for coffee, she asked for her table, and that more than Ethan's words stung like salt and a wound. Her table was the little two-seater by the window, the one Frank built from driftwood after the storm of '82, when half the town was without power. I'd sanded it myself, varnished it with my father's old brush. Camille sat there now in her tailored coat, opening her phone as though she were already home. Frank arrived minutes later, slower now with the winter chill, and nodded to them before he came behind the counter. I expected him to say something, anything to anchor me. Instead, he took off his knit cap and went straight to the back, mumbling about the register tape. His silence was an answer I didn't want. The rest of the morning was a blur of transactions. The high schoolers from down the street bought brownies before first period. Old Mr. Clary came for his oatmeal bread. Every so often I'd hear Camille laugh sharp, deliberate, and see her tapping something into her phone. Ethan never once came to the counter. When they left, Camille held a small white box tied with twine. Not one of the ordinary boxes. It was from the stack I kept under the counter for special orders. Embossed with the Doyle's crested cherrywood motif my father designed when the bakery first opened. She didn't pay for it. She didn't even ask. After the rush, I found the stack of special boxes in disarray. One of them was missing the tiny brass clasp I'd had fitted last year. I felt heat rise in my neck. Those boxes weren't just packaging, they were part of the bakery's history. We'd used them to present the holidays stolen at the winter fair, the kind the whole town waited for. I went to the back room to take inventory and found something worse. The cherrywood box, my father's handiwork from 1946, wasn't in its usual place on the shelf above the mixing station. For 70 years, it had held the splotched, butter-stained recipe book written in my grandmother's careful hand. It wasn't just recipes, it was the bakery's soul. I touched the empty space as though the box might materialize beneath my fingers. Frank came in just then, carrying a stack of flour sacks, looking for something. His tone was too casual, the way people speak when they don't want to invite questions. "The cherrywood box is gone," I said. My voice sounded strange in the warm air of the back room, too sharp against the soft hum of the refrigerator. He set the flour down. "Maybe you moved it." I had never moved it, not once in decades, but I didn't answer. I walked back into the front room, because something about the way he avoided my eyes told me there was more I didn't want to hear. Not yet. That afternoon, the local paper dropped off a flyer for the Spring Heritage Festival. I unfolded it at the counter and felt my jaw tighten. On the front page, under featured local artisans, was a photo of Camille smiling in my bakery, holding the cherrywood box. The caption read, "Camille Harper Doyle to present family heritage baking at this year's auction event." It wasn't just the audacity of her holding it. It was the hyphen in her name. The way she'd made herself Doyle on paper, as if I were already erased. I stood there long after the paperboy left, watching the light shift across the flour-dusted counter. Outside, the harbor fog was rolling in, swallowing the docks where Frank used to moor his boats. The gulls wheeled overhead, screaming at the water, and for the first time I felt like they were screaming for me. Before closing, Mrs. Larkin came back in for a loaf she'd forgotten earlier. She hesitated at the counter, lowering her voice. I'm sorry about this morning, she said. It's just, well, people talk. They say you're slowing down, and Ethan's wife is just trying to keep the bakery going. Slowing down, as though decades of waking at 4 a.m. and lifting 50-pound flour sacks were nothing, as though the arthritis in my fingers meant I was suddenly incapable of guarding what was mine. That night I sat at the kitchen table, the smell of yeast and sugar still clinging to my sweater. Frank was in his chair by the TV, the flicker of a fishing documentary casting light across his face. I thought about asking him if he'd seen Camille take the box, but the distance between us had grown so quiet, I wasn't sure my voice would reach. Instead, I opened the drawer beside me. One Ethan had never noticed. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, was the second half of my grandmother's recipe book. She had written 2 volumes. One had always been in the cherrywood box. The other I'd kept here. For no reason other than an instinct I couldn't name. I placed it on the table and began turning the pages. Each one smelled faintly of vanilla and salt air. Each one was a reminder that not everything Camille thought she'd taken was gone. That in the reflection of the dark kitchen window, I could see myself a woman, older than she felt, smaller than she once was, but with something in her hands worth more than the sum of any bank account. And I knew, even then, this was the first day in a fight I had not chosen but would not walk away from. When I woke the next morning, the drawer I'd opened last night still hung slightly ajar in my mind, like a door to another world. Inside, I'd found nothing incriminating, just a neat stack of folded tea towels and a bundle of yellowed receipts, but the fact Ethan had never even noticed it existed was what stuck with me. It was my drawer, my counter, my shop, yet somehow, lately, everyone treated this place as if it were up for grabs. Frank didn't mention what happened yesterday. He buttered his toast, read the tide chart, and asked if I needed him to carry flour sacks from the delivery truck. I said no. What I wanted was to ask him why our son could say something so cruel, so casually, in front of me, but I could already hear his answer. You're overreacting, Maggie. By mid-morning, I decided to do the Tuesday deposit. The bakery's register drawer was heavy with weekend cash, and I'd been putting it off. I wrapped the bills in a paper band, slipped them into the deposit bag, and walked the 3 blocks to the bank. The air smelled like salt and coffee from Colleen's Cafe. Susan Price greeted me at the front desk with that professional half-smile she reserved for everyone. She'd been at First Atlantic Bank for years, long enough to know the Doyle Bakery account number without looking. Morning, Margaret, here for a deposit, she asked. Yep, weekend sales. I slid the bag across the counter. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Then she frowned, retyped something, and looked up at me. I'm sorry, there seems to be a problem. What kind of problem? Her voice dropped, low enough to force me to lean forward. This account's been closed. For a second, I thought she was joking. Closed? That's impossible. I was just in here last week. I understand, Susan said, hands folded now, as if bracing for my reaction. But according to our records, the account was closed yesterday. There's a note, by owner's request. I blinked. I am the owner. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me. The request was made with proper authorization paperwork. Signed, Frank. My first thought was Frank. Maybe he'd panicked about taxes, or decided to streamline things without telling me. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice level. May I see the signature? Susan hesitated. I can't show you the document itself without an appointment, but I can tell you it matched our records. Whose records? She glanced over. My shoulder. 2 customers had stepped in. Linhan said, I'll have to call you. I walked out into the cold air, gripping the useless deposit bag. Frank's workshop was a few blocks away. I should go there, slam the bag onto his workbench, and demand an explanation. Instead, I went back to the bakery. It was Tuesday. There was dough to proof, and orders to fill. By lunchtime, my head was pounding. I called Frank from the back room. Did you close our account? Our what? The bakery account. Silence. Then, no. Why would I do that? That's what I'm asking. He sighed. I didn't touch the account, Maggie. Maybe the bank made a mistake. A mistake, right? I'd known Susan Price since she was a teller. She didn't make mistakes with numbers. At 3 p.m., I called Susan back. I need the name on that authorization form. I can't, she began, then stopped. It says, Camille Harper. I gripped the phone until my knuckles ached. Camille doesn't have authority over that account. She does now, Susan said quietly. We have a notarized power of attorney on file. Notarized. I almost laughed. Camille, the woman who'd once asked me how to measure flour the old-fashioned way, had somehow walked into my bank and taken control of the very cash that kept my ovens running. I locked the bakery door at closing and walked home with the deposit bag still in my purse. Frank was in his chair, TV glowing, a fishing show humming in the background. She closed it, I said from the doorway. Who did, Camille? She has a power of attorney. He muted the TV. That can't be right. You'd have to sign something. I didn't. He looked away, jaw tightening. Then maybe Ethan did. He's family. I stared at him. And I'm not. Frank opened his mouth, then shut it again. I went upstairs. My hands were still sticky with the day's work, flour, sugar, sweat, but all I could feel was the grit of betrayal under my nails. The next morning, I went back to the bank, not with an appointment, but with my old-fashioned resolve. Susan met me in her office, blinds half drawn. She closed the door. I shouldn't tell you this, she began, but I've seen this before. Someone brings in a power of attorney, often a family member, and uses it to consolidate assets. They claim it's for efficiency, or because the account holder is having trouble managing things. My stomach dropped. She's saying I can't manage my own bakery. Susan's silence was answer enough. Can I revoke it? I asked. You'd need to prove the signature isn't yours, or that you weren't competent to sign. Which, ironically, is what they might be implying already. I left with nothing but a photocopy of the transaction record, Camille's name, printed neatly under authorized signatory. Back at the bakery, the cash stayed locked in the register. I wasn't about to deposit it into any account Camille could touch. Every customer who came in, that fisherman with black coffee, mothers buying scones, looked the same as always, but I felt different. I heard every scrap of gossip, every passing remark, like static in my ears. That closing, I pulled open the drawer Ethan had never noticed. Beneath the tea towels was a small ledger from 1978. My first year running the bakery alone while Frank was out at sea. The handwriting was younger, the numbers smaller, but it reminded me of something important. I'd built this place before Camille, before Ethan's distance, before anyone thought they could take it from me. I slid the ledger into my bag. If Camille wanted to play with paperwork, I could play, too. That night, Frank asked if I wanted to call Ethan. I told him no. I wasn't ready to hear my son defend the woman who'd just reached into my livelihood and locked me out. Instead, I made a list, not of suspects I already knew, but of allies, people who still owed me favors, people who'd eaten my pies at every church picnic, people who knew the Doyle Bakery as part of this town's bones. I didn't know yet what I'd need from them, but I knew I'd need them. As I turned out the kitchen light, the deposit bag still sat on the counter, heavy with unbanked cash, my bakery's beating heart, still in my possession for now. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out how to keep it that way. The cash from the register stayed locked in my bag for 3 days. I didn't trust the bank, and I didn't trust anyone who could walk into it waving papers with my name on them. On the 4th morning, a white envelope appeared under the bakery door. No stamp, just my name, printed in neat block letters. I slid it open with the butter knife I kept by the register. Inside was a copy of a county clerk's filing. The top line made my stomach twist. Transfer of title, Doyle Bakery property, filed last week. Grantor, Margaret Doyle. Grantee, Ethan Doyle and Camille Harper, joint tenants. I read it 3 times, waiting for the letters to rearrange themselves into something reasonable. Beatty I didn't single quotes T. Frank came in from the back, dusting his hands. What's that? I handed him the page. He frowned, squinted, and read it slow. That's not possible, he said. But there was something in his voice, thin, brittle, that told me it was. Camille, I said flatly. First the account, now this. He didn't answer. I drove straight to the county clerk's office. The receptionist, a young man with hair too perfect for our windy coast, clicked through his files. Yes, Mrs. Doyle, that's recorded here. Signed, witnessed, notarized, effective immediately. I never signed anything, I said. He glanced at the monitor again. Signature matches, prior documents, and this, he slid a stapled packet toward me, is the scanned copy. There it was. My name, curling across the bottom like it always had on holiday cards and delivery slips. Only I hadn't put it there. My eyes drifted to the date in the corner. June 14th, 2018. That's not last week, I said. No, ma'am. Document was executed then, but only recorded now. Something cold settled in my spine. 2018 was the summer we'd redone the bakery roof. Frank had handled all the contractor meetings. I'd been in the kitchen every day, patching orders between storms. I left the office with a photocopy of the deed, the paper hot from the machine. Home. Frank was in the shed, planing a length of cedar. "You signed the property over," I said. He looked up, startled, then set the plane down. "What are you talking about?" "Junho 2018, transfer of title. Your name's not on it, mine is. But you handled all the paperwork that month." "I didn't sign the bakery away, Maggie." His eyes darted to the side. "I signed some permits for the roof, that's all." I held up the photocopy. "And what if one of those permits was something else?" Frank rubbed the back of his neck. "Camille brought the forms over. Said Ethan was helping us with insurance and tax benefit if the property was in his name temporarily. And you believed her. She said it would go back in your name after the work was done." "I didn't think." "No," I cut in. "You didn't." We didn't speak for the rest of the evening. The next day, I went to see Dr. Linda Graves for my annual checkup. She'd known me since before Ethan could walk, and she always asked about the bakery before anything else. "Linda," I said, "did Camille ever talk to you about me, about my memory?" She hesitated just long enough. "She mentioned you'd been under stress, that sometimes you misplaced things." I assumed she was just concerned. "Concerned," I repeated, "like getting my property transferred into her name." "Concerned." Linda's eyes widened. "Maggie, if there's been some misunderstanding, it's not a misunderstanding. It's a pattern." I left without scheduling next year's appointment. Back at the bakery, I found a note, slid under the door again. Same neat block letters. This time it was a photocopy of the notarization page from 2018. Frank's signature was there, but not mine. In my place, a signature that looked right until you saw the way the G I looped wrong. Whoever left it didn't sign their own name. At night, I asked Frank, who was the notary. He shook his head. "Can't remember." "You'd better," I said, "because if you don't, I will." I dug out my old ledger from the drawer Ethan never noticed. Flipping to June 2018, I found an entry in my own handwriting. "Roof repair deposit paid to C.H. Camille Harper." 2 days later, I walked into the notary's office in the strip mall by the harbor. The same woman was still there, Mrs. Kearns, pale hair pulled back tight. "Do you remember notarizing a property transfer for me in 2018? She tapped a few keys on her computer, then nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Doyle. You and your husband came in together. I verified IDs and witnessed signatures." "My husband, yes, me no." She frowned. "I remember both of you being there." I leaned in. "Or someone you thought was me." Mrs. Kearns stiffened. "That's a serious accusation." "So is forging a deed," I said. She looked away. "I'm sorry, I can't say more without a subpoena." Walking out, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass door, older than I remembered, but still me. Whoever had stood in my place that day had fooled enough people to move the ground under my feet. That evening, Frank sat at the table, the photocopied deed in front of him. "I was trying to help," he said quietly. "We couldn't afford the roof without Ethan's help. Camille said it was just paperwork, and you never thought to ask me. I didn't want to worry you." I laughed once. "Sharp, you've done a fine job of that now." I slept in the spare room that night. The next morning, I called Susan Price at the bank. "You ever see a deed transfer held back for years before being recorded?" She paused. "Yes. Usually when someone's setting up for a quiet handover, they wait for the right moment, like after a power of attorney is in place. Like now." I thought by the end of the week, I had a file in my ledger drawer, copies of the bank account closure, the deed transfer, and the notarization page. I still didn't know who was slipping documents under my bakery door, but they were the only reason I had proof. Camille came by Saturday afternoon. She didn't buy anything, just leaned against the counter, eyes bright. "Ethan and I are thinking of renovating the bakery front," she said. "Bring it into this century. Make it profitable." "It's been profitable for 50 years, I said. She smiled like she was humoring a child. "Times change, Margaret. Sometimes ownership changes too." I didn't answer, just watched her leave, her heels clicking on the worn wooden floorboards my father had laid when the door shut. I reached under the counter, touched the cherry wood box my father made. Inside, the recipe book was still there, for now. I was starting to understand that for now was the only security I had left. I locked the front door early and pulled the shades. If Camille thought the bakery was hers, she'd find out soon enough what I was willing to do to keep it. And if Frank thought staying silent would save him, he was about to learn otherwise. When I slid the drawer open, the hinges gave a dry squeak, as if they hadn't been touched in years. Inside, under a pile of old receipts, I found a narrow folder tied with string. My father had used the same knot when he packed the recipes into the cherrywood box decades ago. This wasn't just a stash of paper, it was something Frank had kept hidden from me. I sat at the kitchen table, the folder between my hands. The first page wasn't a recipe or an invoice, it was a photocopy of a bank document. My bakery's account marked closed at customer's request. The date was from last month. My signature was at the bottom, except I hadn't signed it. A cold prickle climbed my neck. I turned to the second page, a notarized letter, naming Camille Harper as authorized representative of Doyle Bakery Holdings. The notary's stamp was local, and the witness signature was Susan Price's. Susan had been the steady face at the town bank since before Ethan went to college. I'd trusted her with my deposits, my payroll, my father's will. She'd never once betrayed that trust. But her pen was right there on the page. I didn't hear Frank come in until his hand rested on my shoulder. "What are you looking at, Maggie?" His voice was cautious, too casual to be innocent. "Why is my name on a closure request I never made?" I asked, pushing the paper toward him. He studied it for a second, then set it down. "Camille said the bakery account needed restructuring. Taxes, Maggie. You know I don't follow all the fine print." "She's not an owner," I said. "She's Ethan's wife," he answered, as if that settled the matter. I stared at him. "Did you know about this?" I signed something. She said it would help with expenses while Ethan was between projects." His gaze slid away. I left him at the table and drove straight to the bank. The air inside smelled of paper and sanitizer, and Susan stood behind the counter, her smile tight when she saw me. "I need to know why my account was closed," I said. She motioned me toward her office, shut the door, and lowered her voice. "Mrs. Doyle, I can't discuss client transactions without proper authorization." "I am the client," I said, placing the forged form in front of her. She glanced at it, then met my eyes. "That's the copy on file. It's not my signature." Her silence stretched, and then she said, "You should speak to Dr. Graves." I blinked. "What does my doctor have to do with my bank account?" She provided supporting documentation. A letter. Susan handed me another page, an evaluation form on Dr. Linda Graves' letterhead. The line that hit me hardest, read, "Margaret Doyle is experiencing mild cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia." My hands trembled. "She gave this to you." "It was part of the file authorizing your son and daughter-in-law to act in your financial interests," Susan said carefully. "Once a medical note like this is on record, the bank can't challenge the representative's decisions." I drove to Dr. Graves' office without calling ahead. She looked surprised when I walked in, then uneasy when she saw the paper in my hand. "Linda, you wrote this?" I asked. She sighed. "Camille told me you'd been forgetting orders at the bakery, misplacing money. She said you were embarrassed to admit it, so you just signed off." My voice was flat. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. She showed me a deposit slip you'd lost, some invoices with the wrong dates, which she could have switched herself. I snapped. Linda's shoulders sagged. "Margaret, I may have been misled, but once it's filed," the realization settled in. Camille had built a case, piece by piece, each lie backed by a trusted face. That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled every box from the pantry, every drawer, in the office. In a biscuit tin behind a stack of baking trays, I found another paper, this one older, its edges soft with wear, a deed transfer. The bakery's land and building listed under Frank Doyle's name. Crossed out, replaced with Ethan Doyle. The date was 5 years ago. When Frank came down for coffee, I was waiting. "You signed the bakery over to Ethan." He rubbed his jaw. "When the roof needed replacing, Camille said we could refinance through Ethan's company. I didn't want to bother you with the stress. You didn't bother me. You cut me out." "It's still in the family," he muttered. "In hers," I said. That his silence told me he knew I was right. The next morning, I went back to the bank. Susan was at her desk. I slid the old deed across to her. "Look at the witness signature," I said. She studied it, then looked up sharply. "That's not mine." "No," I said, but Camille counted on me not noticing. For a long moment, Susan didn't speak. Then she opened her drawer and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Mrs. Doyle, you didn't get this from me, but you might find it useful. Inside were notations in Susan's neat handwriting, dates, document IDs, and initials. Besides several entries was the same set of initials. CHI closed the book. Why are you giving me this? Her gaze was steady. Because I think you're going to need proof before you can take anything back. I left the bank with the folder, the forged signature, the false medical note, and Susan's quiet alley shift. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in my chest shift, not lighten, but change, from shock to something harder. Camille had been careful, but she'd also been arrogant. She thought she'd erased every trail. She hadn't counted on me opening the drawer she never noticed. And I wasn't done looking. The morning after Susan gave me her notebook, I walked into the bakery early, before sunrise. The street outside was quiet, salt air pressing in from the harbor. I unlocked the front door, switched on the lights, and let the ovens start their slow hum. I needed the routine to keep my mind steady, but I couldn't ignore the changes Camille had already made. The pastry case was stocked with her modern editions macarons in neon colors, vegan brownies in glass jars. My scones were shoved to the bottom shelf. I turned the open sign but didn't expect anyone for another hour. I was wrong. Colleen Hart was standing outside with 2 paper cups from her cafe next door. She came in without asking, set one on the counter. Figured you'd need this, she said. Heard you were at the bank yesterday. I met her eyes. Word travels fast. In this town, it's faster than the tide. She leaned on the counter. Look, I'm not here to stir things up, but you should. No, Camille's been in my place twice this week, asking about your suppliers, your rent, even your sales numbers. I frowned. Why would she think you'd tell her? She said she's taking over operations. Told me you were stepping back. Colleen hesitated. And that you've been having memory problems. I set my cup down. She's building a story. She's building more than that, Colleen said. Last night, she was talking to the local paper's food columnist, dropping hints about a cookbook she's putting together. All original recipes. Sounded a lot like the pies you've been making since before Ethan could walk. The words hit me harder than I wanted to show. My scone recipes, my grandmother's fudge, my father's rye bread, all passed down. All in that cherry wood box. I looked at Colleen. If she's printing them, she's got her hands on my book. Colleen's brow lifted. Then, you better find out how. By mid-morning, customers trickled in. A few avoided eye contact, others gave me polite, too sweet smiles. The rumors had spread wider than I thought. I kept my hands moving, kneading, slicing, wrapping, while my mind mapped out what I knew and what I didn't. I locked the register after the last customer left, then drove to the community center. Camille had booked a room there for her Coastal Heritage cookbook meetings. I waited in the hallway until the door opened and she stepped out, laughing with 2 women from the Chamber of Commerce. She saw me, and her smile cooled. Margaret, I didn't expect you. I'm sure you didn't, I said. Where's my recipe book? Her head tilted, as if I'd made a joke. You mean the one you said I could look through? Months ago. Don't worry, I've adapted them, gave them a modern touch. They're not yours to adapt. They're family recipes, she said, smooth as glass. And I'm family now. One of the women shifted uncomfortably. Camille caught it and brightened her tone. We'll talk later, Margaret. I'm busy today. She walked away without looking back. That night, I checked every cabinet again. The cherrywood box wasn't in the bakery, the house, or the storage room. 2 days later, Colleen came into the bakery mid-afternoon, when business was slow. She closed the door behind her. You should come with me. We walked to her cafe. She pulled out her phone, showing me a flyer. Annual Harbor Charity Auction, hosted by Camille Harper Doyle. In the middle of the photos was my cherrywood box, polished and staged under soft lighting. I stared at it. She's auctioning it for the Harbor Women's Business Fund, Colleen said. Bidding starts at $500. She knows it's not just a box, I said. She's betting no one else does. The auction was 3 nights away. I didn't have time to go through lawyers or plead with Frank. He'd already proved he'd side with her if she played the right cards. So I started my own plan. I went back to Susan at the bank and slid the auction flyer across her desk. Can you trace ownership? Prove it's mine? She looked at it. Not without a record. You said your father made it. Yes. Her mouth twitched in thought. Then maybe the local Artisans Guild has something. old membership records, invoices. She picked up her phone. I'll make a call. By the time I left, she'd arranged for me to meet a retired carpenter who'd done appraisals for the guild. Mr. Halpern was nearly 90. His hands knotted with arthritis, but his memory was sharp. I showed him the flyer. His eyes lit. That's one of Sam Doyle's pieces, he said. Cherry wood, hand-carved lid, dovetail joints. I helped him choose that wood back in '62. He entered it in the guild fair the next year, won second place. There's a record in the guild archive. I can sign a statement. It wasn't enough to tick the box back on the spot, but it was enough to prove public ownership, something Camille wouldn't want questioned at her own event. The night of the auction, the community hall was dressed in strings of white lights and vases of hydrangeas. Camille floated between tables in a navy silk dress, smiling for every camera. Ethan trailed her, shaking hands. I stood near the back with Colleen and Mr. Halpern. The cherrywood box sat on a velvet cloth, a small placard reading, "Vintage recipe chest, donated by Camille Harper Doyle." When the bidding opened, hands shot up, 500, 600, 7. I stepped forward. Before anyone bids further, you should know that box was made by my father, Sam Doyle, in 1962, and has remained in our family since. I have a witness statement to prove it. The room stilled. Camille's smile tightened. Margaret, this is hardly the time. It's exactly the time, I said. Mr. Halpern moved to my side. I can vouch for it, he told the crowd. I was there when the wood was bought. This isn't a generic chest, it's a Doyle family heirloom. A murmur rippled through the room. The auctioneer glanced at Camille. She gave a brittle laugh. Of course, we wouldn't want any confusion. We'll withdraw the item. Ethan stepped closer, his jaw tight. Mom, you're making a scene. No, Ethan, I said. I'm making sure what's mine stays mine. I turned and walked out before Camille could frame another polite insult. Colleen followed, her grin sharp. That, she said, was the first hit you've landed in public. It won't be the last, I told her. By late September, the air carried that dry, salt-edged chill that meant summer tourists were gone, leaving only the town's year-round heartbeat. I'd hoped the season's change would cool whatever game Camille had been playing. Instead, it only grew meaner. It started as small looks from people I'd known for decades. Mrs. Callahan, who never failed to chat over the register, now kept her voice low and asked if I needed help remembering her order. Then, Mr. Boyle, the hardware store owner, patted my shoulder while telling me not to push myself too hard with the baking. Harmless words, maybe, but they came with the same careful, pitying glance I'd seen once before, when my mother began forgetting names. 2 days later, I got my answer. Colleen slipped into the bakery before opening hours, her hair still damp from the morning fog. She leaned on the counter and dropped her voice. Margaret, I don't know how to say this. Camille's been telling people you're showing signs of dementia. I kept my hands busy, lining scones on a tray so she couldn't see them tighten. Where did you hear that? It's all over the cafe crowd. She's saying you've been misplacing money, forgetting recipes, repeating yourself in meetings. I almost laughed. Meetings? I haven't been to a meeting since the chamber luncheon in May. Colleen shook her head. Doesn't matter. The way she tells it, she's stepping in to make sure the legacy is protected from you. That explained the sympathetic looks. The more respectable the lie, the faster it traveled here. I asked Colleen to keep her ears open but say nothing in my defense. Not yet. I needed to see how far Camille would push it. The answer came quicker than I expected. 3 afternoons later, Susan Price from the bank stopped by under the pretense of buying bread. After paying, she lingered, tapping her fingers against the paper bag. Margaret, just a friendly note. I got a call from Ethan yesterday. He wanted to know what paperwork would be needed if, hypothetically Frank, and you couldn't manage your finances anymore. I set the change drawer down carefully, and Camille was part of that call. Susan gave me a tight smile that said she couldn't say more without risking her job, but she didn't have to. I could see the scaffolding Camille was building, rumor first, then legal justification. And soon she'd be holding the pen over my will by the end of the week. The next blow landed. Frank came in from the post office with a glossy booklet in his hand. This came for you, he said. Though his eyes were fixed on the cover, it was a cookbook. Harbor Sweets, Coastal Maine Baking, Traditions, with Camille's photo smiling in the corner and her name printed in gold. I flipped it open, and my stomach turned. There they were. My mother's molasses cookies, Aunt June's blueberry buckle, The braided cinnamon loaf I'd perfected over 40 years, word for word, ingredient for ingredient, taken from my handwritten recipe book. Frank tried to sound neutral. Maybe she meant it as a tribute. Did she ask? Did she even mention it? He didn't answer, and I realized that was part of Camille's calculation. Get the book printed, launched, and in circulation before I even knew it existed. By the time I protested, the narrative would be, poor Margaret, too confused to remember she gave permission. That night I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, the one Ethan never noticed growing up, where I kept extra copies of community, newsletters, old chamber minutes, and, more importantly, a stack of deposit slips and bakery order logs going back decades. If Camille wanted to play history revision, I'd make sure the town had a different history to read. I pulled the ledger from the week my molasses cookies had won first prize at the county fair, complete with a newspaper clipping showing me holding the ribbon. Proof of origin. Next, I found the chamber newsletter from the year I'd demonstrated the cinnamon braid for the summer festival, with Linda Graves in the audience. People forgot, but paper did and single quotes. The next morning, I visited Colleen. She'd been wary of me for years. A minor dispute over sidewalk seating had left its mark, but lately she'd shown a willingness to listen. I brought her a loaf of rye bread and the cookbook. She flipped through it, frowning deeper with each page. Margaret, this isn't just inspired by, these are your recipes. I laid the ledger and clippings on her counter. I need someone in this town who isn't family to see the truth before Camille tries to bury it. Colleen's gaze sharpened. And what do you want me to do? Nothing yet. Just keep these safe and keep listening. Over the next week, Colleen became my shadow network. She heard Camille at the cafe, bragging to tourists that she was carrying on the Doyle baking legacy because Margaret can't keep up anymore. She caught Ethan telling someone from the real estate office that they might streamline the property holdings soon, meaning the bakery and the lot it sat on. Every report tightened the net around me, but I refused to thrash. Camille thrived on making her target overreact. I'd let her think she was winning. Then came the library fundraiser, a small wine and cheese evening where townsfolk bid on donated items. I'd contributed a basket of jams. Camille was there in a red dress, circulating with the ease of a practiced hostess. On the display table, beside a watercolor of the harbor and a weekend getaway package, sat a signed copy of her cookbook. The bid sheet already had 6 names. I stood far enough away to watch. She picked up the book for a group of women, flipping to the cinnamon braid page. This one, she said, was a favorite in Frank's family. I've updated it a bit, added orange zest. One woman asked, "Did Margaret teach you?" Camille laughed lightly. "Oh, she used to make something like it, years ago, but she doesn't really remember the steps now." The women's polite smiles told me the seed had been planted. I left without speaking to her. Confrontation there would only serve her script. Instead, I went home and opened the drawer again. Beneath the ledgers, I kept a smaller envelope, letters my father had written when he first opened the bakery, describing each recipe he developed or passed down. His handwriting was precise, with flour smudges in the margins. I'd never shown them to anyone. Now, they might become my strongest. That night, I called Susan at home. "I know you can't take sides," I said, "but if someone were forging permissions or claiming mental incapacity to change legal documents, what would prove otherwise?" There was a pause. Then, Susan replied carefully, "Contemporaneous records, dates, witnesses, signatures from before the alleged decline, and someone credible to verify them." "I have those," I said. "Then keep them close." And Margaret, people are starting to ask questions. Not everyone's convinced by Camille's story. That was the first sliver of daylight I'd seen in weeks. The following day, Colleen came into the bakery mid-morning, slipping through the side door so customers wouldn't overhear. She leaned over the counter. "You remember that thing Camille's been using against you? The "you sheltered a thief" story?" I nodded. Camille had been sprinkling it into conversation. How I once let a young man who stole from a shop stay in my home for a week, hinting it proved I had poor judgment. Colleen's eyes flashed. "That was my brother. And he didn't steal a thing," the shop owner accused him. "But you knew he was innocent. You kept him here until the sheriff cleared his name." Camille's twisting it because she's got nothing else. I let that sink in. For years, Colleen and I had carried the weight of that unspoken story separately. Now it became a link between us. "Would you tell that publicly?" I asked. She nodded without hesitation. If it comes to it, that night, I began drafting a plan, not for a private defense, but for something Camille couldn't swat away in whispers. The clippings, the letters, Colleen's testimony, Susan's quiet confirmation. I wouldn't launch it yet, but the next time Camille stepped onto a public stage, she'd find the ground beneath her gone. For now, I kept the drawer locked. My father's handwriting, and my own history tucked inside. Camille could have her rumors, her cookbook signings, her little triumphs. I'd let her carry them all the way to the edge. And when she leaned over to look down, that's when I'd push. The October wind carried the smell of wood smoke through the harbor streets, and the summer tourists were long gone. I was beginning to think Camille might be resting on her victories when the phone rang. It was Colleen. "You need to come to the community hall, now," she said, her voice taut. "What's happened?" She hesitated. "Just come, and brace yourself." I wiped my hands on my apron and told Frank I had to step out. He barely looked up from the paper. The community hall was buzzing with early setup for the annual harvest auction, a fundraiser for the local clinic. Tables lined the walls, each loaded with donated goods. My eyes moved over quilts, gift baskets, a hand-carved boat model, then they stopped. There, under a spotlight in the center table, sat a cherrywood box. Not just any box. My father's box, the one he'd made from lumber salvaged from an old fishing dock, polished so smooth it reflected light for 60 years. It had held the Doyle Bakery's handwritten recipe book. A white card leaned against it, vintage heirloom. Recipe box with contents donated by Camille Harper Doyle. My pulse roared in my ears. I stepped forward, lifting the lid just enough to see the edge of my mother's handwriting. The paper had yellowed, but I knew the feel of it. I'd kept it locked away for decades, in a drawer Ethan never once opened. Behind me, a voice said brightly, "Margaret, isn't it wonderful?" Camille thought the clinic could really benefit from something so historic. It was Linda Graves, holding a clipboard. "Linda," I said, forcing my voice steady, "this box is not hers to give." Linda's smile wavered. "She told us it was a family decision. I assumed." "You assumed wrong," I cut in. Camille was across the room, arranging wine glasses at the refreshment table. She spotted me and glided over, the picture of calm hospitality. "Oh, Margaret," she said, "I was going to call you. We thought this would be the perfect way to share your legacy with the town. Everyone will get to see those beautiful recipes." "You had no right," I said, keeping my voice low. She tilted her head. "Frank agreed. Ethan too. And you've been saying you don't bake as much anymore." "I never said that." She smiled thinly, as if humoring a child. "Well, the auction committee is thrilled, and the starting bid is already at 200. I looked past her to see a man scribbling on the bid sheet. If the box left my hands tonight, I'd lose not just the recipes, but every scrap of proof tying them to me. I turned to Linda. "Remove it from the table, now." Linda glanced between us, uneasy. "Margaret, the catalog is already printed, then unprinted." Camille's voice sharpened. "You're making a scene. Better than letting you steal the soul of my family," I said, loud enough for two nearby women to hear. Camille's eyes narrowed, but she kept her smile. "Let's not ruin the evening. We can talk about it tomorrow." "No," I said. "We'll talk about it now." A few heads turned. Camille hated open conflict. Her power lived in closed doors and whispered conversations. I had just dragged her into the light. She leaned closer, her perfume sharp. "If you pull that box tonight, you'll only confirm what people are saying, that you're not thinking clearly. Do you want them to see that?" I held her gaze. "I want them to see the truth." Linda stepped in. "Margaret, maybe we should." "Linda," I said, "as my doctor and my neighbor, you know I am perfectly capable of deciding what belongs to me. Take it off the table." Something in my tone broke through her hesitation. She lifted the box and handed it to me without another word. Camille's smile froze, then cracked. "Well, I suppose some people don't understand the spirit of giving." I walked out with the box under my arm. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. At home, I set it on the kitchen table and unlocked it. The smell of old paper and cinnamon rose up. There was my mother's recipe for molasses cookies, written in fountain pen. My father's notes on flour ratios for humid days, newspaper clippings of county fair wins, and, tucked in the bottom, a folded letter in Frank's handwriting I didn't remember. I opened it. Margaret, I know you worry about Ethan losing interest in the bakery. Camille says she can help keep it alive if we modernize. I've agreed to let her make copies of your recipes for a book. Hope you don't mind. It was dated 2 years ago, months before the cookbook appeared. I sat down hard. Frank had given her access. Maybe he thought it was harmless. Maybe he believed her charm. But now the theft was complete, and she'd nearly made it irreversible. I put the letter back in the box and locked it again. Then I picked up the phone. Susan, I said when she answered, I need you to confirm something. If a family heirloom containing original intellectual property is sold at public auction, does the buyer own the rights? Yes, she said slowly. Unless you can prove it was sold without your consent. And if I can prove that, with witnesses, then the sale's void. But you'd have to be fast. Once it leaves the seller's possession, things get complicated. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Margaret, if Camille's willing to go that far, she's close to whatever her endgame is. Keep that box locked and in your sight, and get ready. She's not going to back off after tonight. I didn't sleep much. At dawn, I carried the box into the bakery and put it in the bottom drawer again, locking it with the small brass key. My hands were steady now. Mid-morning, Ethan called. His voice was clipped. Camille tells me you embarrassed her in front of half the town. She put my property up for sale. It's a recipe box, Mom. It's the heart of this bakery, and you let her near it. He sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Camille's trying to preserve something you built. You should be grateful. I'll preserve it myself, I said, and hung up. An hour later, Colleen came in for coffee. She leaned on the counter. You shook her. She didn't expect you to pull the box in public. She come at me harder now. Good, Colleen said. That means she's off balance. And I heard something you might use. Susan's been quietly collecting documents, signatures, dates, bank authorizations. Camille thinks Susan's on her side, but she's building a case file. That was the first real crack in Camille's foundation I'd seen. By afternoon, the town was buzzing with 2 versions of the story, that I'd snapped and snatched the box like a jealous child, or that Camille had been caught trying to sell what wasn't hers. Lines were being drawn. Frank barely spoke at dinner. When he did, it was to say, you didn't have to humiliate her. She humiliated herself. He shook his head. Ethan's furious. He says this is proof you can't let go. I looked at him across the table. Maybe I can't let go of what's mine. That night, I unlocked the box again and spread the contents on the table. The letters, the clippings, the recipes. I began sorting them into 2 piles, one for the bakery's history, and one for the courtroom. Camille thought she'd take my legacy quietly, that I'd fade into the background while she smiled for photographs. She hadn't counted on me stepping into the light. The next move would be mine. The day of the charity auction arrived with the kind of brittle sunshine that makes the harbor look cleaner than it really is. I stood outside the community hall, the wind carrying the smell of fried clams from the pier. My name was still being whispered in that half-sympathetic, half-pitiful way people in a small town excel at. Camille had made sure of it, feeding the narrative of my declining memory, until I became the woman you smile at, but don't trust with change for $1. Inside, tables lined with donated items filled the space. Homemade quilts, antique clocks, fishing gear, and there, under the soft glow of an overhead spotlight, sat my cherry wood box, my father's work. The one that had lived under my counter for 50 years, its brass latch worn smooth by my hands. A white card in front of it read, Lot 27 Antique Recipe Chest with Local Culinary Heritage, donated by Mrs. Camille Doyle. The sight hollowed me out. I'd turned the shop upside down looking for that box 2 weeks ago. Frank had said maybe I'd misplaced it. Camille had smiled her thin smile and patted my hand. Now here it was, repackaged as her generosity. I didn't rush forward. I walked the room, speaking to people, letting my presence settle in before I moved closer. Colleen caught my eye from the coffee urn, her brows lifting in a silent question. I gave a slow nod. She understood. She'd been my lookout for days, feeding me scraps of information Camille didn't know I had. Ethan was there too, standing beside Camille as if she'd anchored him to the spot. He laughed at something she said, then glanced my way. No warmth in that glance, just the polite acknowledgement you give a neighbor, not a mother. Margaret, Susan Price's voice came from behind me. She held a clipboard, wearing her banker's neutral smile. Nice to see you here. I imagine you already knew about Lot 27, I said, keeping my tone leveled. Susan hesitated. Items come in from various donors. It's not my place to, of course not, I cut in. You just write the receipts. Her gaze flickered, but she didn't answer. That was fine. I already had what I needed from her weeks ago. When the auctioneer tapped the microphone, the chatter dropped to a low hum. Items moved, quickly knitted throws, hand-painted buoys, until he reached the box. Lot 27, he announced, a piece of our town's culinary history, crafted in cherry wood, containing handwritten recipes dating back generations. Opening bid, $100. Camille stepped slightly forward, her hand resting on Ethan's arm, her smile wide. Enough for the local newspaper camera. Hands went up. 150, 200, 250. I let it climb. My pulse kept pace. At 300. Colleen lifted her paddle from across the room. I didn't move. Camille glanced at her, a flicker of annoyance slipping through her performance. 350. A man near the stage called, Colleen, 400. Another bid, 4-50. Colleen, 500. Murmurs rose. That was no small sum for this crowd. Camille's smile tightened. I stepped forward at last. 1,000. The room stilled. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. Camille's hand fell from Ethan's arm. 1,000, from Mrs. Doyle. The auctioneer repeated. Do I hear more? Silence, a few whispered exclamations. No. The gavel came down. Sold, to Mrs. Doyle. I walked up, took the box from the stage myself. The weight in my arms felt the same, but now it carried the eyes of everyone. In the hall, I met Camille's gaze. Thank you, I said, just loud enough to carry, for keeping this safe for me. A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd. Confusion, curiosity. Camille recovered quickly, drawing Ethan toward the refreshment table. But I saw the stiffness in her shoulders. I didn't go home. Instead, I carried the box straight to the bakery. Colleen followed, locking the door behind us. Check inside, she said. I opened it. The top layer of folded linen was still there, the faint scent of vanilla clinging to it. Underneath lay the recipe books, but not all of them. My grandmother's ledger, dark green leather, its spine cracked, was missing. In its place, a bound, galley-proof, Coastal Confections, Recipes and Stories by Camille Doyle. The title page carried a copyright notice in her name. I flipped through, each recipe printed with glossy photos. My recipes, my handwriting transcribed, stripped of my name. Colleen let out a low whistle. She's not even subtle. She doesn't need to be, I said. Not if people believe I can't remember what's mine. We spent the next hour photographing every page, every note in the margins that proved their origin. I slipped the galley-proof back into the box, replacing the lid. At 5 o'clock, Frank came in. He looked from me to Colleen, then to the box, on the counter. So you bought it back, he said. I kept it from walking out of town for good, I replied. He rubbed the back of his neck. Camille says you're making this harder than it needs to be. I set the galley-proof in front of him, opened to the recipe for lemon cream pie. My mother's. Read the credit line. His eyes moved over the page. By Camille Doyle. He read aloud, then looked up. She's planning to launch it next month, I said. After she finishes convincing everyone I can't tell a pie crust from a coffee filter. Frank's mouth worked, but no words came. Colleen broke the silence. She's playing this in public. Maybe it's time Margaret does too. Frank left without answering. I didn't follow. That night, I opened the drawer beneath the counter in the back rear drawer. Camille had never noticed. One she couldn't have. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, was a stack of signed order forms, letters from the Historical Society, and a single photograph. Me at 25, standing beside my father as we locked the cherrywood box for the first time. His handwriting, on the back read, for Margaret, keep it safe. I knew then that keeping it safe no longer meant hiding it. The next morning, I took the photograph and copies of the recipe proofs to Susan Price. Her office was quiet, the blinds half drawn. She closed the door before speaking. You have what you need now, she asked. Enough to stop her, I said. She hesitated, then opened a file drawer. From inside, she drew a thin envelope and handed it to me. This is the signature authorization Camille filed to change your banking permissions. I shouldn't have it. But if you want the community to see what's been happening, you'll need more than recipes. I slid the envelope into my bag. Why help me now? Her mouth curved in something almost like a smile. Let's say I don't like being used either. By afternoon, word had spread that I was displaying something special at the bakery that evening. I hadn't invited Camille or Ethan. I didn't need to. In a town this size, absence is as telling as presence. At 6, the shop was full, neighbors, customers, even Dr. Graves. Colleen poured coffee, keeping the air warm and busy. I stood behind the counter, the cherrywood box in front of me. This, I began, has been part of my family since my father built it. Every recipe inside was tested in this kitchen. Some of you have tasted them for decades. Yesterday, you saw it at the charity auction under someone else's name. I opened the box, laying out the green ledger, the galley proof, the photograph. I want you to see what was almost taken from this town. Gasps moved through the crowd as they flipped pages, recognizing dishes they'd eaten since childhood. Murmurs swelled when they saw the copyright line. I didn't accuse anyone by name. I didn't need to. Every head turned toward the empty corner where Camille might have stood. When the crowd began to thin, Ethan appeared in the doorway. He looked at the box, then at me. She says you're trying to humiliate her, he said. I'm just showing the truth, I replied. If it humiliates her, that's her doing. He didn't argue. He just left. By the time I locked up, I knew what would come next. Camille wouldn't retreat. She'd strike harder. But now, the tide had shifted. The town had seen the first crack in her polished surface, and I had more than enough to widen it when the time came. I slid the cherrywood box back into the drawer beneath the counter. Just for tonight. Tomorrow, it would come with me to the one place she couldn't rewrite the story, the Community Awards ceremony, where I planned to finish this. The morning of the Community Awards ceremony, the town square was already strung with lights, though the sun was still high. The breeze off the harbor carried the smell of salt and fried haddock. From the bakery window, I could see the hall doors propped open. Volunteers hauling in trays of food. I had the cherrywood box in my arms, not hidden this time. It was polished to a low shine, the brass latch catching in the light. Inside was the ledger, the galley proof, and the photograph of me and my father. In my bag, Susan's envelope containing the forged authorization papers. Colleen met me outside the hall. She's here already, she murmured. I followed her gaze. Camille stood near the stage in a seafoam dress, speaking to Dr. Graves and a cluster of council members. Ethan was beside her, in a navy blazer, hands in his pockets. He didn't look at me. Inside, tables were arranged along the walls, each displaying the accomplishments of the year. A restored dock, a mural by local students, a new community garden. At the center, a long table draped in white linen held the awards engraved plaques, small trophies, a crystal vase for the Heritage Keeper Award. By the program, Camille was the evening's last presenter. When the speeches began, I sat in the second row, the box on my lap. The mayor thanked donors, praised volunteers, and read a list of projects. Laughter and polite applause rolled through the room in measured waves. Then Camille took the stage, smile precise, voice warm. She spoke about preserving local heritage, about protecting the town's legacy for future generations. Her words flowed easily, practiced. And this year's Heritage Keeper, she said, is someone who has worked tirelessly to document our culinary history in a forthcoming publication. That was my cue. I stood, the box in my hands. That movement drew eyes immediately. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, my voice carrying without strain, but before this award is given, the town needs to see exactly whose heritage is being kept. A ripple moved through the audience. Camille's smile faltered. Margaret, perhaps I stepped to the front, placing the cherrywood box on the table beside the vase. My father built this 50 years ago. Inside are recipes written by my family, tested in my bakery. Some of you have eaten these pies and cakes since you were children. I opened the box. The green ledger lay on top, its pages worn, covered in my handwriting, and my mother's before me. I turned a few pages so the audience could see. 2 weeks ago, I continued, this box disappeared. Yesterday, I found it at the charity auction donated under Camille Doyle's name. I lifted the galley proof. And this coastal confections by Camille Doyle's, a book of those recipes. Not credited to me, not credited to the bakery, but claimed entirely by her. Murmurs rose. I heard my name whispered. Camille spoke quickly. Margaret, you've been under a great deal of stress. I held up the photograph. This was taken the day my father handed me the box. His note on the back says, for Margaret, Keep it safe. I've done that until recently. Then I took the envelope from my bag, and while we're speaking of keeping things safe, I have here a copy of the signature authorization Camille filed at the bank changing my account permissions without my consent. Susan Price, standing near the back, inclined her head slightly. I passed the paper to the mayor. The signature is not mine. Anyone in this room who knows my handwriting can confirm it. The mayor's brow furrowed as he looked from the document to Camille. The council members shifted in their seats. Frank stood in the aisle, his face pale. Is this true? He asked Camille. She kept her chin high. I was only trying to protect family assets by taking them, I said. The air in the hall tightened. Dr. Graves, silent until now, spoke from her seat. Margaret's memory is intact. I've never diagnosed her with any cognitive decline. Any claims to the contrary are unfounded. That landed heavily. People who had believed Camille's quiet rumors now saw the source. Ethan finally spoke. Why didn't you come to me with this? I did, I said. You chose not to listen. His eyes dropped. The mayor cleared his throat. In light of these revelations, the Heritage Keeper Award will not be presented tonight. An investigation into the financial and intellectual property matters raised here will begin immediately. I closed the box, locked the latch, and took it back into my arms. The applause that followed was not loud, but it was steady, and it was mine. Camille left without speaking to me. Ethan followed, his steps slow. Colleen touched my shoulder. That was the first real silence I've ever seen from her. Enjoy it while it lasts, I said. She'll find her voice again. But the balance had shifted. Everyone in that room had seen enough to doubt her, and in a place like ours, doubt grows faster than trust. When I think about everything that's happened, I don't picture the shouting or the stares. I remember the quiet moments, the ones where I had to decide whether to step forward or let someone else tell my story for me. I'd spent most of my life believing that patience and good faith could fix almost anything. It's what kept the bakery running, what kept my marriage steady, what I thought would keep my family together. But people can take patience for weakness. They can take your good faith and write their name on it. I learned that the hard way, standing in rooms where my own son treated me like a guest, hearing neighbors repeat lies because they were easier to believe than the truth. Here's the reality. No one likes to say out loud. In a family, fairness isn't guaranteed. Love doesn't stop someone from taking what's yours if it suits their plans. And if you don't set the record straight yourself, the version they tell will become the only one anyone remembers. So now, I keep my records. I speak up the first time something feels wrong. I don't wait for the right moment that never comes. And I've learned to stand in the same room with someone who's wronged me without feeling the need to soften it for their comfort. If you're listening, to this end you've been made to doubt your own place in your family. Hear me. You don't need their permission to defend what's yours. You don't need to be loud, but you do need to be clear. Start keeping proof. Find your allies. And when the day comes to show your truth, bring it into the light yourself. To those who've walked through that kind of storm, hold your ground. They can take your name out of their mouths, but they can't take it off your work if you refuse to let go. Thank you for staying with me through this. If you want to follow the next story I have to tell, you know where to find me.